The next two sampling strategies, the stratified and the cluster, both depend on groups, but the groups are done in a slightly different way for each of those styles. So we're going to start with the stratified. In the stratified, the population is split into subgroups where each subgroup has the same characteristic. And then we're going to take a random sample from every single one of those subgroups. So for example, we could create groups by gender, by age, by job type, whether they're freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. We could do groups by major. So suppose that our 12-person population, that the blue, maroon, and green each represent a different characteristic that we think is important somehow in how people might respond to our survey questions. So I'm going to take a random sample out of the blue, the maroon, and the green. And notice that the maroon group is twice as big as the blue or green. So I'm going to take twice as many people at random out of that group. So I'll get 2 maroon people at random, a blue one at random, and a green one at random. And that's going to be my stratified sample from that particular population. So let's look at an example of this. If I was researching funding for a football team at a large university, and suppose we thought that there might be a difference in people's opinion based on gender. Whether there is or not is not what this class is about, but suppose that was our concern. Then if I wanted to get a sample of 1,000 people and I wanted to use this stratified design, I would select 600 men at random, which is a 60% split there, and 400 women at random. So I'm keeping that 60-40 split, and I'm still getting a random sample of 1,000 people. So that stratified design is based on groups having the same characteristic. The cluster design, you're creating subgroups that all look like mini groups of the population. So each of those subgroups or clusters should be a representative sample from that population. And then what we're going to do with all of those representative samples or subgroups is that we're going to pick a couple of them at random, and then we're going to take everybody from those groups and we'll survey them, and all the rest of the people are going to be sent home for the day. So if we took our 12-person population and we split it into 6 groups of 2, and then we pulled 2 groups at random, that would give us our 4-person sample using a cluster process. All right, let's revisit the football team. So a good way of doing this, if I still wanted 1,000 people, but I wanted to use a cluster sample, I would go through the population and I would create groups of 100 people, where each 100-person group had 60 men and 40 women. So each group has that same 60-40 split. And then if I need 1,000 people, that would be 10 of those groups. So I'll pick 10 of those groups out of however many of them I have. And I'll pick 10 at random, and that'll give me 1,000 people total. Now, there is a bad way of doing the cluster, and that's when you lose that representative part when you're setting up the groups. So suppose we split this into 2 groups by gender, and then we chose one of those groups. So we either surveyed all the men or all the women. Then we're obviously going to have really biased results. So the cluster design, if it's done as intended, is going to get you a great random sample. But if you don't make sure that the subgroups are all representative to start with, then what you do is going to get you in hot water real quick. All right, let's look at these two from the perspective of getting ice cream at an ice cream shop, because maybe that'll help clear it up a little bit. Okay, so the stratified would be like if I went to the ice cream shop and got some ice cream and I put a little bit of every single topping onto my ice cream. So there's chocolate and caramel and strawberry sauce and coconut and gummy worms and sprinkles and everything that they have, right? So I'm taking a little bit out of every single container and putting it into my bowl of ice cream. The cluster one would be like I'm taking all of one thing and putting it on there. Now it should be a representative thing, but it's all of one container, and then the other containers are all left alone. Okay. All right, so come back to the next video. We're going to look at some ways that you can get really biased samples with the convenience and voluntary response samples.